Anyway, everybody, thank you all for coming. My name is Peter Hawkins. I'm co-chair of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce, and I'm really pleased that you made it in the weather of the ice storm that wasn't. You know, we all had this worry about traffic and all that stuff, but I'm really glad you made it. This event, of course, is featuring FCR, our great member, and they're a long-term member of the Chamber, and we will be promoting their services that we described them in detail. But, of course, we're talking about Brazil. And so Brazil is one of those countries that people from Brazil never stop loving Brazil, and people not from Brazil don't know anything about Brazil. They think it's a bunch of women in feathers and guys playing soccer. So in fact, it is not. It is a diverse economy, it is a high-tech economy, and it's a sophisticated market. And my company, Melbourne Logistics, we ship to Brazil every day. It is a complicated market, but it's actually an easy market if you do everything you're supposed to do. So my hope is that you will enjoy the presentation and learn something. And I want to do two things first. I am going to do a land acknowledgement, and a lot of people say, oh, why do you do it? What does it mean? I don't care, and all that kind of stuff. But the fact is, this is a country that has grown because of settlement and colonization, but there were other people here first. And so I do like to acknowledge who was here first, and I also am very proud of the fact that while I wasn't first, I'm really proud to call this country my home. So the official land acknowledgement for the City of Toronto is the one that I'm going to be using. So we acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The City of Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. It is now home to all of us, and I'm proud to live and work here. So first, I would like to introduce Ambassador Vanja Nobrega, who is the Consul General of Brazil in Toronto, and she has been a great friend of the Chamber, but she's also been a great friend of business. She's got more than a decade of experience in Toronto, I think, here, and she in fact knows the players here, she knows the players there, and has always been accessible. She's been a real asset to us. And so I would like Ambassador Vanja to open and to say a few words. Thanks so much.
Thank you for the introduction. And yes, indeed, I'm always available. I'm the Consul General of Brazil here in Toronto. And not only me, but I have a team on several fields like trade, promotion, and investment, technology, but also legalization, which is exactly what Felipe was telling me, that sometimes a client or a company has a problem because, you know, bureaucracy, this would be and always will be bureaucracy. So we have to go through it. So if you have a problem, you have a doubt, don't hesitate to contact us. And can go directly to me, we can go through Peter and the BCCC, he will reach me because sometimes I'm out of town or whatever, someone will answer you. But I always tell you, can send me directly, there's no problem, but you can always send to the general email of the consulate, and if you don't know, well, just go to the website, because we have a team very attentive to answer the message that we receive daily. And I was glad to hear from Felipe that we were able to help his client, and makes myself happy, because that's our work here, to help Canadian and Brazilian do their work. And having said that, I understand that the seminar, the main point is to understand a little bit more this government and the new government, and to make business, of course, and to know how it will work institutionally. And we have two experts here to say. But before that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the inauguration of the President Lula, which was on 1st of January, and it was an amazing celebration of democracy, which more than 60 high-level international delegations. And it was really popular party, but at the same time very business and strong statement what the President Lula and his team wants to do. However, 1 week later, and I believe everybody here is aware, but it's important from my point of view to mention here, to make very clear that the coup-mongering violence register in Brasilia on January 8th was serious, no doubt about that. It was really serious, but it failed. And as it failed, it showed that the Brazilian state and its democracy and its democratic institutions are solid and responded immediately, unanimously and vehemently, to repudiate the acts of terrorism and vandalism that shocked Brazil and the world. Also, the Brazilian people repudiated the vandalism and the violence of the acts. As you know, Brazilian people are not violent. We are not in our soul. So 93% of the Brazilian people rejected immediately those acts. And since then, the Brazilian institutions, they are working very seriously and according to the law to investigate those acts and punish by law. So the Brazilian government will continue with determination to defend and act in accordance with the precepts of the 1998 Constitution, under which the country records the longest period of democratic coexistence in this Republican history. I would like really to mention this and to guarantee that it was a great opportunity to show that Brazil is absolutely strong and going to a very solid environment for business and for our evolution and progress. So having said that, I will leave you with, I believe, the next speaker, Peter will tell you. But again, I'm available to you, my team. Don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much and have a great seminar.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I just spent a month in Brazil, and I had a very interesting meeting with Meninder Sidhu, who is the Parliamentary Secretary for International Trade, and he attended the inauguration, and it was the first time that somebody that senior from the Canadian government had gone down to Brazil to an inauguration. It really was demonstrating how important the new government was to the Canadian government. And what I want to stress is I was actually going down there for holidays, and I ended up having a meeting every 3 days with people who wanted to do business with Canada. And so it reminded me that this is a viable, hot market. No matter what the politics are and the drama that you see, you have to remember that this is a place to do business, and it's a place that wants to do business. And so I'm delighted that we have Eduardo Fleury and we have Philippe Jeffrey from FCR Law, and they are going to now give us some presentations, and we also have some special guests of theirs. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say, gentlemen. So all yours.
No, I think for now that will be fine, just for my good morning. Before starting the event, I need to say something that if I will be doing a presentation in São Paulo that starts at 7:30, I would most likely be by myself talking for the presentation. So this is very, very different for us to start an event at 7:30 in the morning. But so first, I would like to thank the BCCC, Peter, to have invited us to come here in São Paulo, and also to have helped us quite a lot together with his team to put this I believe, very interesting event. And I would also would like to thank the Consul to have been with us today. This is quite nice. I was saying before I start to introduce myself a little bit more, but I'm very glad to be with you today, because the last time that we were here, It's now 3 years ago, the last time that we were in Toronto, that we did a presentation together with the BCCC and so on. It was in February of 2020. And I remember when I took the plane going back to Sao Paulo, everybody, half of the plane was already starting to wear a mask and so on. Nobody knew exactly what was going to happen. And a couple of weeks after this, well, the whole thing came. So I'm very glad to be back here in Toronto, because normally we're here a couple of times per year to discuss with you and other clients and so on. Well, this is a bit the agenda for today. One comment, normally when we are here, we do a lot of presentations about how to do business in Brazil, because obviously a lot of people in Canada are really interested to know how do I open my company in Brazil, how the taxation will work, and so on. But together with Peter, we really believe that we could have done the same thing, like today in February. But I think for all the things that have been happening for the past few weeks, the past few months in Brazil, we believe that it was interesting and to discuss a little bit, based on our experience, what do we expect that will happen in Brazil, for you to have, an understanding that, I will kind of sum up what we're going to explain during the past few. There are great opportunities in Brazil, and I think that more than it goes, higher those opportunities are there. Peter mentions about his experience. I've been living in Brazil for 22 years, so I've seen what's been happening over. And I think for the past few years, we really feel that there's a great interest in the Brazilian market for Canadian companies doing business. So basically, Eduardo will start. What we will discuss today about taxation, a little bit different. We will talk about the proposed tax reform that Brazil is discussing, because probably if you start, business in the next few months, you will have sooner or later to understand what will be this tax reform, because I was listening yesterday, reading the news from Brazil. The vice president and also the Minister of Finance, both of them at different events, said yesterday that the tax reform needs to be passed this year. Tax reform always needs to be passed in the first year of a government, because after this it just goes downhill. But I think when the Bolsonaro government started, we really believed that the tax reform was going to be passed, and the pandemic happens and other things happen that makes everything more complicated. But that's something that you will need to be aware. We still do not have all the details, because it's a work in progress that is going on, but that's what we'll be focusing today. Mainly Eduardo will talk about how we understand that this could look from a tax perspective. And then we have Alessandra for Tendencia, a consulting firm from Brazil, that will talk about the business inside for 2023. And then I will do a small portion about corporate income tax reform. Okay? So very quickly, I'm a tax lawyer, originally from Quebec City. I started my career working. I was talking with William today, some time ago, at Coopers and Lybrand in Quebec City. That now became PwC. And I worked at PwC for over 20 years. And then 7 years ago, Eduardo invited me to join him at the firms. That is now called FCR Law for some time already. So I'm a tax lawyer. All of my clients are Canadian companies almost all of my clients are Brazilian companies doing business in Brazil. FCR Law, very quickly, we are mid-sized law firms. We have approximately 40 lawyers. We specialize in 3 main things: corporate law, labor law, and tax law. And for all of those groups, we have the consulting side and we have the litigation side also. What is important for you, we are the only firm in Brazil that's got a fully dedicated Canadian desk that we have created, like when I started with Eduardo. We are always involved in Canada-Brazil relationships, consultings for Canadians, and also Brazilian companies that is looking at the Canadian market. The biggest part of our work is Canadian companies looking at Brazil. but we also have a certain level of volumes of Brazilian companies looking at the Canadian market also. So we work on both sides of the border. We are, not to be pretentious, but we are well recognized in the Brazilian market for all those institutions. And we are well known. I think that that was our goals, Eduardo and I, for the past 6-7 years, to become like a reference for Canadian companies looking at Brazil, and also, like I say, for Brazilian company looking at the Canadian market. So now I invite Eduardo that will start the presentation. Thank you very much.
First, good morning. Thank you for being here with us today. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Brazilian economy and also the tax reform. But the Brazilian economy, of course, Alessandra will talk a little bit more, with much more detail. But before that, I would like to thank BCCC for helping us, Peter especially, and all the team, okay, for helping us to hold this event here in Toronto, okay. And as Philip said, we last time we were here is in 2020, just 3 weeks before the pandemic hits whole world. And of course, for me, it's like such a long time. It's 3 years, because you used to come here like twice every year. So for us, 3 years was a long period. So for me, it's like much more than 3 years. And sometimes you feel that, usually I used to say that the facts happen so fast in our time. So every time, if you sleep 1 week, especially the last week in Brazil, and you decide to sleep just 1 week entire, when you wake up, you think that, oh, you lost. You are going to spend like 3 weeks to understand what happened in the last week that you slept. And so that's something that this modern world we have, it's very strange. And to be fair about the, just to go, that's me, okay? Okay, that's the me and my career. Okay, I'm a founder of FCR Law, and basically I work with tax law and corporation. But my idea here is to talk a little bit about the numbers of the last government. But you probably are going to say, but you are here to talk about the next government. Yes, but you have to understand what happened in the last 4 years to understand what is going to happen in the next 4 years. That's why I put some numbers here about the last 4 years. Of course, everybody knows that the last government, Bolsonaro's government, was elected with a speech of pro-market. Okay, and sometimes they say when you go abroad, not go abroad because last 4 years, last 3 years, it was not something that we did very frequently. But sometimes you see that when you're talking with the foreigner people, they are saying, oh, but the Bolsonaro government was too much pro-market. It's not exactly like that. That's why I would like to make some, just to make the right comparison between the last government and this government that is starting right now. And but you have to be fair with the last government. Let's suppose, if you see these numbers like the GDP growth, you see that the first year, it's okay. It's like you are starting a government. Usually the first year is not so good in terms of numbers. The second year, you say, oh, it's negative GDP growth. Of course, but it's 2020, it's the pandemic. So all the countries, they have this kind of negative GDP growth. And of course, And some other countries, they have worse numbers than that. So it's common. The next year we recover. Basically, by the end of 2021, we have the same GDP that we had in the beginning of the pandemic. So we recovered, let's say. And for 2022, we 2.9. It's not exactly the number. It's only a prediction. And it's also a good number. It's not bad. If you see, for example, the inflation, of course, for Brazilian patterns, 4% it's a good number, because Brazil has a history of bad numbers with inflation, far from now, like 30 years ago, something like. I was young at that time, and so, but 4% is acceptable. Usually, it's very close to the target inflation, because central bank has a kind of regime where they fix the target inflation. Usually 4% is okay with this target, usually a little bit higher, but that's okay. And during the pandemic, also the inflation and the GDP is not the numbers that you have to see like a result. 2021, all the other countries also had inflation like that. Especially not that time, not so because the gas price, but also because the logistics, the problem with China and so on. That's why the prices went up in that year. And this year we have a good result, like inflation, 5.8. That's the number, 0.79. But it's not. It's a good number if you compare to US. Let's suppose it's like a lower inflation, but there's a little trick on this, because the Brazilian government, especially the federal government, they forced a reduction of the taxation on fuels, and so the price of the gas and so on went down, not because the international market, but because the taxation that was reduced. One of the tax that is very important for in terms of pricing of the gas, they put 0. So that's one of the reasons that the inflation was a good number. But even if you consider this, if you take this measure out of the analysis, the inflation will be pretty much 8%, 8.5%, which is the same number of the US. I put the numbers all comparing to the US because, of course, it's a benchmark for the numbers in terms of economy. So, as I said, the numbers are not so bad up to now. And in terms of unemployment rate, you can see that, of course, you have to make the pandemic out of the number of the pandemic is bad, but in that time, you know, it's interesting. In 2020, the unemployment rate was 14.20%, which is high, even for Brazilian patterns. It's high, but in that time, we had the best distribution of income of the history of Brazil. Why? Because the aid that the government gave to the people that were unemployed at that time because of the pandemic. And so it was a very good result in that time because in terms of distribution of income. It's very interesting. And after that, you see that the unemployment rate is going down. Until last year, we don't have the final number for the last year, but in October we had 8.30%, which is a good number for Brazil. It's not a good number for US and other countries, but for Brazil, because the numbers in Brazil regarding the unemployment rate are not so good, and so that's why if you are like 7%, we are very close to the full employment, and so this number is good. Like if you have 7% of unemployment rate, you start having like increasing of salaries more than inflation and things like that. And so to make the comparison and to be fair with the last government, we see that these numbers are pretty good, I would say, for a government that passed through a pandemic. So I think it's important to see. And but when you see what they said that, it's difficult to measure how good was a government during the pandemic. If you see only the numbers, it's very difficult to make a kind of, what I can say that, okay, we did pretty much what the other countries did, so that's okay. In terms of reforms, that's one thing that I think it's important. There was a pension reform which Brazil has been struggling for such a long time trying to do this pension reform, and it was passed in 2019, the first year of the government. So it's very important to have passed a reform, any reform that you want to do in a government in the first year. So it's very important. And the other, I put in my view, of course, in terms of importance, the second important, I would say, reform, was the central bank independence. So it's something that we have been trying to do this 20, 30 years, but only Bolsonaro made it. We have to understand that we have to recognize this. It's very important right now, especially because the president of the Bank Central right now, he has a mandate for the next 2 years. And so it's important to have a kind of balance with the new government and from central bank that was nominated to the last government, as happens in many countries. And besides that, we have a new set of rules for the sanitation sector, which is very important. Okay, and the new set of rules for natural gas. It's out we say marco regulatory, so it's a new set of rules for this sector, and they are attracting a lot of investment. And despite the first, I would say, speech that you have in the inauguration, they said that some ministers, they said, oh, I will change something on that, but Lula already said, no, we are keep all of these rules that was approved by the last government as they are. So it's very important. So say that what we can expect from Lula's government. That's what we can expect, and what we can know so far, what we know so far from this new measure. The first thing that we have to understand that Lula's victory was not like a kind of most of the people or the people that voted to Lula voted to Lula. Sometimes they voted against Bolsonaro. So Lula knows that he doesn't have a kind of big base in terms of even in the Congress, but also in the population. So there's no room for doing like the thing that the left wing sometimes they want to do. There's no room for that. That's what we expect. And also, I would say that the problem of Lula for the next government, for the election, pretty much is the same thing that they did during the governments that they were there. And so they want to repeat what they did in the past. Wrong or right, that's what they want to do. But they don't have a kind of big reform to do beside the tax reform. That's the only thing that rests for the government. There is an expectation that a new fiscal policy rule, because we have a teto of gasto, that is a limitation of the expenditure for the government, but this is died. This is not respect for Bolsonaro, didn't respect it. Even they changed the rule many times, and also when Lula was elected, Lula made a kind of effort, and they approved a new license to spend more money in this year. So basically, this limitation of expenditure is basically that. So they are the new Minister of Economy. They are expecting he's saying that he's going to put a new fiscal policy rule. That's what we are going to expect. But they don't have this ready yet. So what rests for us is the tax reform. So the tax reform that we have me and Melina, we have been working for, in fact, for the Congress and for the government and other people, many other people. We have been working, trying to put this tax reform in place. And for such a long time, Melina more than me, we have been working for such a long time with this tax reform. And one of the, I think for me, one of the best guys that we know about the tax reform, which is Bernard Api, he is in the government right now. And he is in a position that is Secretary for Tax Reform. So he is there only for that. So it's, and basically, as we know him, he's there only for that. He will not accept this kind of position if he doesn't have this kind of assurance from the government saying that they would at least try. You know that it's difficult, but of course it's, we have many, as Philip said, many authorities, Vice President and Minister of Economy, yesterday they said the tax reform will be the first reform that we are going to send to the Congress. That's what we expect. So basically we have two tax reforms that we, and I checked they will try to do the two. I don't like so much this thing because two reforms trying to manage income tax, corporate tax on one side and consumption tax on the other side, it's something that is hard, it's difficult to pass. But okay, I'm not a politician. And basically, why we have to do the tax reform? Because, let me check. Because as many people know, we have a lot of indirect tax, or tax that you have to pay when you are selling some service or good. So you have federal tax, you have state tax. State tax, we have ICMS, which is a fake VAT, because you cannot take credit of many things that you buy. And so it's important, it's a very important tax, and we have 27 legislations, 27 laws, 27 regulations, so it's very complicated. So you have to manage this. It's a lot of things that you have to consider. So that's why we have some problems with ICMS. Also, ISS, it's a little bit simple in terms of legislation, but you have, it's charged by the municipalities, and so you can have sometimes different set of rules for each city, and so it's something that's happened, it's a problem. And this kind of combination of tax, that federal tax, state tax, municipal tax, results in tax costs, because most of these taxes, they are not, I would say, integrated, which is not, it's cumulative. It's being cumulative, you have to spread the tax cost all over the system. So when you ask someone how much you pay that in terms of taxes in Brazil, of course you can see the rates that is applied to your business, that are applied to your business, but in fact the tax cost that you have in the inputs and so on, it's very difficult to figure out. Okay, so it's a kind of thing that is very bad in Brazil. Of course, if you have a lot of laws, you have a compliance cost that's high in Brazil, and we always talk about this. That's why our law firm works a lot. And if you have many laws and you have a kind of uncertainties at times, you have a very high volume of lawsuits in terms of taxation. Okay, and as a consequence, less investment, less exports, and less GDP growth. So the economy is hurt by this kind of tax regime. And basically, we have two proposals. We have the PEC 45, which is amendment of the Constitution. Well, you have to do the tax reform in Brazil, you have to amend the Constitution. And basically, you are going to put all the indirect tax together in one VAT, okay? And we call IBES, which is a name for it, okay? It's a VAT, non-cumulative, all credit. And there are some, if you compare with some, the idea is of PEC 45 is to have a flat rate, but some special tax regime for like financial system, real estate, or something like that, because you have to treat different these sectors. But basically, it's a flat rate. But it should, because we have a federation problem in Brazil, every level of government will approve a rate. So you're going to have a rate in the municipal level, state level, and federal level. But once you have these rates, it will be applied they will be applied for any product or services that you are selling. That's the idea in terms of simplification of the system. In Brazil, we have two features that we can say that's a little bit different, which is this, in terms of food, there's a proposal to give a kind of personalized exemption, which is basically you go to the market to buy food, and they will identify your tax ID. And if you are enrolled in a low-income aid program, you are going to receive the tax back in your bank account. So basically, you buy, you pay tax, and you receive the money back. Today, it's happening. It's not something that is different. Every time you go, for example, in the state of São Paulo, in other states also, but in São Paulo you are going there, you buy something, you receive a tax invoice, and this tax invoice is already registered in your account if you gave the tax ID. And you receive part of the ICMS that you are paying in this tax invoice, you are going to receive part of this tax in your account. Okay? And that's something that can happen in Brazil. Okay? We have a technology for that. And the other thing that's important, and this from this PEC 45, is that we are going to have a tax agents that will take care of the administration and regulation of the system. So it will be independent. It's good, because sometimes if you have the tax administration, they want to give money, they retain the money from the government and so on. This agent will be independent, and it's very important to have to be fair with the taxpayer, to be fair with the government also. The other proposal that we have is the PEC 110, which is basically almost the same thing, the principles, the destination principles, and so on. But this PEC was constructed because the federal government said, oh, I don't want that this tax agency will administrate my side, my tax, okay? So the idea is to create a dual VAT, okay? And so the federal government will have the CBS, and the state and municipal government will have the IBS. So basically, that's the difference between these two proposals. And because of the negotiations that we had with the sectors, we already put in the amendment of the Constitution many rules that in the PEC 45 we are going to put in the law, not in the Constitution. So basically, the difference is who's going to run the tax in this case. So we'll be an independent agent for the IBS, state and local government, and the CBS would be run by the federal government. But right now, because the problem that we had for this proposal is because the federal government doesn't want to mix its tax with the other tax. But right now, the federal government wants to do this. So it's probably that the PEC 45 will be the first try to be passed in this government. So this proposal has a transition period. Sometimes in this PEC 45 we have 6 years of the transition period, because we cannot change everything in 1 year. It's bad. India tried to do this. It's not a good experience. So that's why we expect to have this passed, but it's not, it will be like 6 years, 5 years, 7 years, depending on the negotiation, to have the system totally in place. Okay? Okay, thank you, pessoal, people, for the time. And now we will have Alessandra that will talk about the economy. Okay?
Hello, good morning to all. I hope hearing me okay.
Yes, we are.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to talk to you this morning. And I would like firstly to thank the Brazil and Canada Chamber of Commerce and the special invitation from Eduardo Fleury. So my mission here is to present a scenario for the Brazilian economy post-election. And as you know, we had very tough moments in the at the end of last year and in the beginning of this year with some movements, especially undemocratic protest in Brazil capital. So the political context is very now, I would say, at least interesting in Brazil. So my mission here is to present our view on the political scenario and its consequences for the Brazilian economy. So I will share with you my presentation so to guide here the discussion. I hope it's working well. And well, to start this discussion and for you to understand what guides our baseline scenario for the Brazilian economy, I brought this picture to show you that the new government, Lula government, should form a very broad coalition in order to pass the important projects in Brazil in the next years. In our view, the new government, it's a quite weak government. The country is very polarized. We had the former Brazilian President Bolsonaro with a very significant amount of votes. So the right forces in Brazil are very, very important. So we have this polarized situation, and Lula's political capital is quite weak compared to other administrations. So our main point here is that in order to govern, Lula must form broader coalition. And here I brought some exercise in relation to the coalition in the lower house to show you some numbers and just for you to know, to have a constitutional amendment in Brazil, we need 308 votes in the lower house, and for other projects, the majority is 257 votes in the lower house. So when we do some exercise to understand the size of these coalitions, here in the first case, when we consider the electoral coalition, which is the parties that were with Lula during the campaign, mainly left-wing parties, we are talking about 143 congressmen in the lower house. So very, very far away from the majority amount of votes and also for constitutional amendment. When we consider some independent parties like PSDB, PSD, MDB, much more center parties, we should have something around 227 congressmen votes in the lower house. So our main point here is that Lula must form this base or this coalition with right-wing parties in order to pass important projects in the Congress. Some exercise here just with one party, União Brasil party, we should have something around 288 votes in the lower house. So the point is, Lula the new government should have this support from the right-wing parties. And there are positive and negative points from this reality. I would say that the positive points are that this broad coalition should force the new government to the center, so the risk of very left-wing agenda, in our view, is low. Of course, exists, but the risk, in our view, is low, given the need to form with the right-wing parties. But on the other side, I would say the negative factor behind that is that it might be difficult to build common agendas. And then we might have some instability in the coalition. So the main risk, in our view, talking about the political scenario, is instability. It's not a left-wing agenda, especially in the economic field, but is instability, and we don't go further. Of course, we don't go back in some reforms, which is positive, but we don't go on important agendas like the tax reform, as Fleury just presented. So this is what guides now our baseline scenario, this political force pushing the agenda much more to the center. When we talk about the political scenario, and especially the economic agenda, I brought here the figures of the main names in the economic arena. So we have the first figure, the finance minister, who is Fernando Haddad. The second one is the planning minister, Simone Tebet. And the third one is the vice president, Alckmin, who is the Minister of Industry and Commerce right now. And what's the point here? These figures, these people have different views on the economic field. I would say they have different economic orientation. Just to give you some examples, the finance minister believes that it's important to have a stronger presence of the state in the economy in order to spur GDP growth and to reduce inequality, for example. The other two names believe in a much more market approach with a stronger presence of the private sector in the main fields of the, not just in the economic arena, but especially in the economic arena. So we have these heterogeneous views on the economic field. So there is this point of uncertainty. So we don't have a very clear line about the economic policy in this new government. So in our view, there might be a lot of discussions about different issues, especially the fiscal issue, behavior of the fiscal accounts in Brazil, and the referee will be, in our view, President Lula. And when I say that the main topic of discussion is the fiscal situation in Brazil, just remembering some aspects, Brazil had an important increase in public indebtedness when we look in relation to GDP, given the pandemic, of course, and during the electoral campaign, both of the candidates, the former Brazilian President Bolsonaro and Lula, during the campaign, giving the very tough campaign, pointed to stronger, higher spending in order to capture the electorate. So our fiscal policy is very, very loose, and the new government started these first days with an important increase in spending. And given this fiscal background, we are discussing a new fiscal framework as well. As Eduardo just said, we have a ceiling room. So this ceiling room says that it's not allowed the federal public expenditure to grow in real terms, but in the last years, also given the pandemic and the political situation, we have spent much more than the ceiling. So the ceiling room is very, very loose at the moment. And there are a lot of discussions to have a new framework. And this is the main point of doubt. How this framework is going to be built. There are going to be rules on the expenditure side or not, because it's necessary to have limits on spending, give the last year's trajectory in spending. So just to give an idea, our budget is very, very tight. It's, we don't have space, in fact, for discretionary spending. About 93% of our spending are mandatory spending. So the discussion about spending is very important in Brazil. And it's not yet clear if this new framework is going to bring this view on public expenditure. So this is the main point of doubt. And this is the trigger, in our view, for us to be in the baseline scenario, which is, as I said, it's a responsible approach, even in the fiscal arena, given the need of a broader coalition, the behavior of the financial markets, forcing this responsible fiscal approach, and so on. This is what we have in our baseline scenario, a quite pragmatic economic policy in the fiscal field. But if these elements do not work well, we have a much more irresponsible fiscal policy, this is the trigger to a more pessimistic scenario in Brazil. So this is, normally I say that this is the main umbrella to talk about the Brazilian economic scenario, because it defines the macroeconomic stability, what we are going to do with the fiscal account in Brazil in the next months. So once again, the baseline scenario is this pragmatic approach. We expect higher spendings, so we work with that, but this higher spending in part counterbalanced by higher revenues as well. So this is the main point when we discuss the economic policy. But I would like also to highlight some opportunities with this new government. One of the main opportunities, in our view, is the improvement in international relations, international community, I would say, because the former Brazilian president, and in the last years, Brazil was really isolated from the international community. So we had no space to discuss, for example, trade agreements and other opportunities for Brazil. So Brazil was really isolated, and with this new government, we see a room to improve the international relations, open up space to attract investments, and even to advance with the EU-Mercosur trade agreement. This agreement was paralyzed in the former government, given the environmental issues, especially by France. And now, with the focus on the environmental agenda by the new government, we see here an opportunity to advance with the trade agreement, which will be very, very important for Brazil, talking about productivity and effects on potential GDP. Also, another opportunity for Brazil, if we work well and we do well, especially in the fiscal arena, preserving the macroeconomic stability, is the opportunity, and here the tax reform is really important, considering the new global context and the nearshoring and friendshoring logic after the pandemic and the conflict in Europe. Brazil is well positioned to attract these investments. So we should see some positive impacts on Brazilian industry, especially if we pass the tax reform in Brazil. So there are some opportunities as well. There are risks, and the risk is in the economic agenda, but also opportunity with this new government. So given this background, this political background, I would like to show you our main projections, especially talking about the Brazilian GDP growth. So just to remember, during the worst moment of the pandemic, the Brazilian GDP fell 3.3% in 2020. Then we had a strong recovery in 2022 with the Brazilian GDP growing 5% in 2021. Last year, we expect the Brazilian GDP to grow 3.1%, which, by the way, was stronger than we previously projected, was much, much stronger. But for this year, as you can see here in the picture, we project quite good slowdown. And what is behind the global situation, so the deceleration of global GDP growth, which affects Brazil mainly through the trade channel, because we export commodities, but also manufactured products. So we are affected by this, especially the trade channel. And also we have the effects of the tighter monetary policy in Brazil, fighting against higher inflation in the last years. So as the whole world, Brazil is also fight against inflation, but the Brazilian Central Bank started the monetary tightening process in 2021. So we are seeing already the first effects of the tighter monetary policy, but we expect stronger effects during this year. So that's why we have these effects on Brazilian GDP, especially in 2023. Once the situation, the inflationary situation is more controlled, we expect the Brazilian Central Bank to lose the monetary policy, and then we have gradually the economy recovering and growing around, in the next years, around 2%. So these are the main points behind this slowdown projected by this year. And also I would like to highlight is the uncertainties. Of course, this political situation, the uncertainty in relation to the fiscal issue, of course, this higher level of uncertainty limits spending on investments and consumption. So this is the big picture talking about Brazilian GDP. And I would also like to highlight some details of the Brazilian GDP. Here is the breakdown. So the upper part of the table is the GDP from the supply side, and the lower part of the table is the GDP from the demand side. So looking at 2022, looking at last year, the main figure, the main sector behind this quite good GDP growth was the services sector. And here is, of course, the effect of the face-to-face, person-to-person services that recovered quite well last year once the pandemic situation was much more controlled. So we had this movement very important to explain GDP growth. And when we look at the projection for this year, this sector should lose momentum because we do not have anymore this comparison, very weak comparison basis. So the sector is much in line with the situation in 2019. So we have recovered, and in some services sector, more than recovered the pre-pandemic level. And when we look at 2023, also I'd like to highlight the very good performance expected for the agribusiness sector. So as you can see here, we project the agribusiness sector growing more than 3%, and here is mainly production. It's grain production, but also different kind of meat production behind this good figure for the agribusiness sector. Looking from the demand side, last year the main factor behind was household consumption, and of course much in line with the services recovery, but we also had a good performance in goods consumption. So that's why the consumption should have grown more than 4% last year, and for this year also should decelerate, capturing especially the effects of the monetary policy on credit. So credit is going to be, or it's already more expensive, and of course it limits consumption. And on the other side, we have the situation related to services. And when we look at investments, this GFCF, last year and for this year, we expect some stabilization. Of course, the whole scenario, the global scenario, and the higher interest rates in Brazil, of course, affect investments. So we expect this stabilization with some recovery, especially from next year on, counting also on infrastructure investments, as I will discuss a little bit more in the next slide. And the external sector helped quite well last year, and of course it's going to lose momentum given the global situation, but it's going to be also important this year to support GDP growth, as you can see here, with exports growing more than imports. Well, in sectors, and here I brought some industry investment insights, also considering now the new government, the focus on the environmental agenda. We see some sectors with very good opportunities in the next years. So I would like to highlight the good expectation that we have for energy, and here especially solar and wind power projects in Brazil. In fact, these projects and this kind of energy have been growing quite a lot in the last years. So they are very important sources, energy sources right now, with hydro energy in Brazil. And in our view should grow above GDP, given also this focus on the environmental agenda. It's the same thing with biofuels. We have a very good productivity in Brazil. Of course, when we compare to fossil fuels, it's more expensive, but we have good productivity, and this kind of projects should be very interesting in the next years. Also, when we look at the main sectors that should have good performance, we continue optimistic about infrastructure in Brazil. As Fleury just said, we had in the last years new regulatory frameworks especially for sanitation, railroads, which in our view should spur investments in these areas. And also we have learned and we have changed some models, to conceive these projects to the private sector. Very interesting models to attract the private sector. They were very, very successful in some projects that we had, especially last year. And in our view, it should continue. Even with the new government, of course, the public BNDES is our development national bank, should be a very important role in coordinating and structuring these projects and concessions. So it should be very important for sanitation, but we do not expect change in the regulatory framework and even in the role of the BNDES in Brazil. So it's the same thing for railroads, giving the new regulatory framework which should favor the presence of the private sector, and with roads, airports, and ports. So we continue optimistic about infrastructure. And just to add another point, an important point here is that given our fiscal situation, we do not have space to have public investments or state with an important role to spur infrastructure investments in Brazil. We do not have this space in our budget. So we need the private sector to go on with the infrastructure projects in Brazil. And the other final point when we talk about industry investment highlights, I would like to point to the extractive industry in Brazil. And especially when we talk about iron ore and oil and gas. Given the past investments and the new investments in the pipeline, we are very optimistic about iron ore production in Brazil, and even with oil and gas production as well. Just to give an idea, our projection for iron ore production this year is of a growth of 4.6%, and for oil and gas, 5.3% as well this year. Talking about iron ore, of course we have the main companies, but the main one is Vale, which has a very important plant in the north part of the country, and it's a plant that's very, very competitive. The productivity in this plant is very, very high, and it's a plant that should contribute very positively to iron ore production in the next years. And another point is the recovery of some areas in the southwest part of the country where we had the terrible accident some years ago, and now these areas are being recovered to produce again. So these areas are also important to explain why we are optimistic about iron ore production this year, but also in the next year. Of course, the scenario is limited by the global demand, so it's considered here in this projection the global situation, but even though we have here a good picture for iron ore production. And even with oil and gas, we have a lot of investments, so we have a lot of platforms in the market right now contributing to increase production. But here, especially given the role of Petrobras, we have some uncertainties with the new government. We do not know yet the policy in relation to the price of fuels in Brazil, so there are some important uncertainties here. But considering the past investments, we should see some good increase in production as well in the next years. So just some takeaway points here. Giving now this presentation related to political scenario and main economic issues, I think the main takeaway points here are that the main risk when we talk about the economic environment is the fiscal side, is the fiscal issue. If we go to a responsible or a irresponsible way, talking about the fiscal account in Brazil, so it's very important to determine the macroeconomic stabilization in the next years. The second point is that our baseline scenario consider the need of a broad coalition of this new government, and this is going to be important to limit negative agendas and to force the economic policy, mainly the main policies, but especially the economic policy to the center. And finally, considering the global scenario, there are a lot of opportunities for Brazil if we do well in the fiscal arena, especially talking about the nearshoring and friendshoring logic after the pandemic and the conflict in Europe, the attraction of investments related to environmental agenda, and the advancement of the Mercosur agreement, which should be very positive if we have as well the tax reform here in Brazil favoring our industry. Well, I think that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. I had some questions for you, but you ended up by responding the question as part of your presentations. So I know that you cannot stay much longer with us, but I would like to see if someone here has got any questions that you would like to ask Alessandra, or she was kind of thorough her explanations and like what she's expecting for the next month.
Alessandra, I have a question. Can you hear me? You talked about the EU trade agreement. Do you have any news on the Canada-Mercosur trade agreement?
Can you hear now? No.
You can hear.
Sorry, I
You can hear well, but I couldn't hear him very good.
What he was asking you is that, like you mentioned a little bit about the EU-Mercosur agreement, but as you may know, prior to the pandemic, Canada was in strong discussions to have a trade agreement between Canada and the Mercosur. And he was asking you if you have heard any news from this subject recently about like the possibility of like starting again the discussions between Canada and the Mercosur.
Yes, now it's very clear. Thank you. We have heard with the new government members that the focus now, it seems, that is with EU and Mercosur agreement. But I think with Canada should be the next step, because I think we should solve some issues related to the environmental agenda. And if it goes well with EU, I think we have a good background to go on as well. But we have heard that some priority here is on EU Mercosur.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? No? Well, Alessandra, I would like to thank you so much. Your presentation was very interesting, and well, enjoy your day.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
I have one question just to educate myself. I'm sure members of the audience might have an answer. In terms of the lower house, there's a requirement for 257 majority. What is Lula's party's control in the lower house?
It's 148.
On her slide, his coalition, his left coalition was 143, wasn't it?
And his party has a...
Is much smaller than that. I don't know how many people are supporting him, but
I don't have the slides anymore, which were showing three things, like Lula by itself.
Is one
So, yeah, okay. The second one was already the other political parties that have made coalitions with Lula. So this is the reality today. And on the right side of the slide, and we will ask her to divide per slide, so I guess Peter and the BCCC can and then she was showing exactly, looking at one right-left party, how far it can go, and then she was comparing this with the approval at the Congress, and also on the top line is the level of approval that is required to be able to change the Constitution.
Yeah, so with this coalition of 227, still got to work with 30 other members.
Oh yeah, this is for sure. This
But
is for sure.
you know, for example, in the last, by the end of the last year, they had to approve the amendment of the Constitution to have the authorization to spend more money in this year. And they easily approved this. We don't have like, if you compare, I'm much more familiar with the US, that's why I'm giving the example. But the Republicans in the US, they are very, I'd say, opposition to the other government. There's no such thing in Brazil, okay? Mainly they are, when you say right-wing, you are not saying like something that is very against. Most of these guys that we are considering right-wing right now, they worked with Lula in the other government, in other opportunities. And so it's not so deep. I would say that if you saw we have a 538 representatives in the lower house, and in this case, I would say that we have 100 of people that you can say that they are right. Okay. There's a lot of room to negotiate this. The example of that they passed the last amendment, like I think with 400 representatives voting in favor of this.
All right, no,
So I don't see like the position so strong like that. Okay.
Out of a total of, sorry, just as reference, what is the total number?
It's 538. 538.
Yeah, if I can comment about it, I'm not like a political analyst here, like very far away from me, but my experience with 20 years of seeing what's been happening. I mean, for many years, who runs the country is the center at the governmental level, okay? So we had president from Lula, more from the left, and before Cardozo, that was more like a center-right government, left depending on what he was looking at, and then you had Bolsonaro that are right there. Like Eduardo was mentioning, Bolsonaro was able. Bolsonaro is probably one of the worst negotiators that I've seen in my life. And obviously he had a team of people doing this for him, and they managed to do that. But looking at now the situations, I mean, if there's one guy that has the experience, that is excellent negotiator at the political level, you cannot find better than Lula to do this. He managed to. I'm not in favor of one. I'm just telling you my opinions of what I'm seeing right now. Lula is a smart guy. He's an excellent negotiator, and he has put a team. I can discuss potentially some of his decisions, but obviously the decisions of putting Geraldo Alckmin as his vice president was key. And I remember when he took that decision, that was my view at the time. I always thought since the beginning that was an excellent decision. But I remember when the decision was made, at the PT level, it was like major crisis. At the PSDB, was it made, or more the center wing? Everybody looked at this. It was very surprising because Alckmin and Lula have been pretty much like opposite. Lula had said in the past very critical words for Alckmin and vice versa. But that's how Lula is a smart people. He can read what is needed and he can attract what is needed to go, where he wants to get. So all of this, but I mean, Tebet that was put, that was a senator that got very good reputations in Brazil. Actually, she was involved on the tax reform also, no? Or
Yes, kind of.
yeah. Well, okay. But when she was defeated after the first turn of the election, it was not an easy decision also for her to go on the Lula side, but she decided to do that. And Lula had some issues to try to find her a good position in the government. I think he did, because she can criticize to a certain point what Haddad as a Minister of Finance will be doing. So I think put together a very good team. You know, you can criticize or not some of the members that, but again, he's a smart person. And I was there living in Brazil after that. After Cardoso when he was elected. Obviously now he's much older and all of this, but that was always my feelings. Obviously the PT over all those years of powers and all this is not healthy. You know, like to have powers for 16 years. It's not a healthy thing for any government. It can be in Canada, like Trudeau was like, you know, but this is what's happening. But I'm very confident that I agree with her. The fiscal policy, you know, this is key, and this is unfortunately a limitator to a certain. But if you look from your perspective, as the private sectors, like she was saying at the end, Brazil has never more needed the private sector that is going to need going forward. And we're talking about humongous projects, and when we're talking about infrastructure, sanitations, and so on. And this is not only the core business. A lot of my clients are technology companies that works for sanitations, that works for logistics, that works. So it aggregates a level of opportunities for Canadian companies that is extremely interesting. Sorry, this was a long comment. So.
Good. So now I asked that question in terms of the makeup and its impact in our operations in Brazil. So it seems like, you know, we shouldn't expect anything negative coming out of this new government, is what I'm hearing.
Yes. You know, I think
Gold
the
miner. It's just
gold miner. Okay. Well, no, I don't think so.
And,
I don't think so.
Another question is regarding the tax reform. There's always been talk of tax reform, from what I understand.
Yeah.
And I have limited experience in Brazil. I'm getting to know the country more and more now. But there's talk of tax reform, and taxation there is bizarre, to say the least. Not bizarre. Sorry to criticize your country.
That's why we're fighting.
But given the makeup of the current government in the lower house and the requirement for 308 for majority for this constitutional amendment for tax reform, is it possible to expect such a major change in tax reform given before it didn't pass or it didn't happen? Now there's increased polarization within your country.
Yeah.
Is there possibility that tax reform is
I will let the specialist to talk to comments. At least the first about this.
No, in fact, first, we have been talking about this tax reform intensively in the last 4 years. That's even if in the past we talked a lot about this necessity, the need of the tax reform, but in fact, the last 4 years was very important about this. The discussions, many seminars, many discussions about it. So,
just for that to record.
Okay. Our experience in the last 4 years is very important. Maybe last 6 years we are talking about this. We are constructing a proposal, a very detailed proposal. So we have this side of the proposal that is much more stronger than we had in the past. First. Second, in the last year, basically the last year, and 2021, that we formulated the Pacts 110. Basically, the problem that we had at that time is that the federal government didn't put some force in this proposal. They said, "Oh, that's okay, I will support," but in fact, they didn't do this, and they didn't do this, and so that's the problem. Right now, we have a government that wants to do this, so it's not a kind of right wing or left wing. So that's why we think that we can have this proposal, especially the VAT proposal, approved. Income tax can be something that you can have some discussion between right and left wing, but regarding the consumption side, of course we have to discuss a lot. There's a lot of interest in this, but not the political issue in terms of right and left. Okay. So I think if you put the federal government, on the side of the tax reform, we have a pretty good chance to approve it.
So you're saying it depends on the will of the government?
Yes, and so right now, as we are hearing from them, they have this kind of enthusiasm.
Yeah, the will is really high. They talk about this every day.
And because they don't have another project to put, that's it.
Exactly.
So this is a key campaign promise then?
Yes,
of
yes,
Lula?
exactly. Especially the vice president is in the past and today he is very, say, on the side of this proposal.
So that was interesting. Thank you very much for asking me that.
Questions?
We almost over. I think the last thing that we wanted to discuss with you, and I'm not going to go through all of those items because some of those items here are very focused for tax people. So I understand that you are not tax people, and this is not. But I will try to focus on what is important and what you will understand for sure. Okay. So the first item, I wanted to start with the good news. You know, because normally when we talk about tax, we don't talk about good news, and the second one will be a not so good news. But I'll try to counterpart with the other one. So I'll start with the second one, that you can read and all of this, okay? Brazil is one of the very few countries, and those people here have been making analysis around the world, so if I say something that you don't agree, let me know, but indeed, very few countries around the world were still not taxing dividends when the dividends are received by individuals, as an example. You know, a lot of countries in Europe have like what we call like share participation rules where they will exempt the payments of dividends between companies. But normally at the end of the day, when the final beneficiary of the dividends will receive that, normally everywhere around the world the dividend is taxed. No longer following with the principles of the same is that the government always said, I will not allow you to create a companies to receive dividends and to pay less tax than if you will provide the services that you're doing as an employee of a companies. So they always try to balance a little bit to make sure that nobody will do like tax reductions in a bad manner, not to pay tax. In Brazil, it was not the case, and it's still not the case until today. So if I open a company in Brazil, I can have special tax regimes that will allow me to pay to a certain extent, very limited corporate income tax. And when my company will remunerate me as a shareholder by paying me a dividend, I will not pay tax on the dividend. Okay. So this has been discussed for many years in Brazil. You know, the necessity of start taxing a dividend. This is not easy discussions because this involves a lot of people in the society, a lot of politicians, and so on. So it's always been kind of an issue that was kind of kept under the carpet. You know, it came and then okay, let's forget about this. But now, you know, when the discussion about the tax reform started, that initially was a little bit more focused on indirect taxation because we always knew in Brazil that was a focus on where we need to resolve the issues. Obviously, this came back with discussion about BEPS around the world and all those international tax discussions. Brazil had to start to align itself with the international market. And now, as part of the tax reform on the corporate income tax side, I would say it's kind of decided now that dividends will then start to be taxable in Brazil for local shareholders, but also for foreign shareholders. And then to compensate this increase of taxation, the idea is obviously to decrease the corporate income tax level. Okay, here we're showing 25%, but I was talking with Eduardo, depending on what you read, what you look like. But more recently, it should be something around that. But obviously, all the rates that we're showing here are not definitive. It's just subject to discussions and negotiations. But this will be the main change for the corporate income tax side, is that dividends will now be taxable, subject to some exemptions. Intra-group dividends should not be taxable. Dividends with investment fund should also normally not be dividends, but subject to confirmations. But that will be the main idea of the corporate income tax reform. tax dividends and reduce a little bit the corporate income tax. So for a Canadian company, this will change a little bit for you guys because you would still, well, it depends on what will be the real effect of the reduction of the corporate income tax, you know, to see like if, but potentially it will not be exactly like let's say like a flush result where like but today Brazilian company that's got investment in Brazil, again I'm no longer a fully specialized Canadian tax advisor, but normally a Canadian company that receives dividends from abroad, normally this dividend is not subject to additional taxation in Canada. That is called the exempt surplus. There's a calculation that is done that I did when I was working at Coopers and Lybrand a long time ago. But now you would be subject theoretically to a 15% withholding tax. So, and if, you know, subject to confirmation with your Canadian tax advisor, but normally when a country takes a decision not to tax the dividend, if there is any withholding tax that is paid abroad, this withholding tax becomes a cost. Because the Canada or Europe or wherever, they say, I'm exempt you this dividend, so I'm not going to give you a credit for that. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen in Canada. Potentially this can be the result. So then you will need to see, because today you receive a dividend from Brazil, you don't pay withholding tax, and that's it. Normally you don't tax in Canada. But we still need to see by the reduction of the corporate income tax if there will be, you know, potentially we'll have a little increase of you know, the entire cost of the transaction, but this is something that, that you need to keep in mind. Now I would like to have a mic, but I'll stay here not to change a little bit the setup. The other points that I think I wanted to mention to you, okay, this is fine. Because all the rules here are much more focused on local taxations, you know. So I'll give you an example. There's a concept in Brazil of paying interest on net equity. What is this? No one around the world has got this concept. You calculate based on an interest rate that is defined by the central bank, that is called the TJLP. You calculate this interest rate based on the net equity of the Brazilian companies. And the result of that, subject to some limitation that were in the past and still today limited to 50% of current year earnings or 50% of accumulated earnings, you could remunerate the capital that was invested in Brazil through a payment of interest on net equity. What is the benefit of this? The payment of interest on net equity is tax deductible. So when we pay this to our foreign shareholders, there's a 15% withholding tax on this payment. So talking on nominal basis, you've got a 34% tax deduction locally with a 15% withholding tax. So it's quite interesting. It's always been interesting. This, over the past few years, because of BEPS with the OECD and all this, this has changed a little bit the benefit for foreign shareholders, because now it's pretty much everywhere around the world, when a payment that is made in a foreign country is tax deductible, the recipient of this abroad needs to tax this. But even like for the past few years, when I was really focused on, I still focus on international taxation, but we still have some countries around the world why it was not taxable, because abroad it was understood as a dividend, and in Brazil it was understood as a payment of interest. So we had a deduction in Brazil and no taxation abroad. So this still exists, you know, but what they try, and this is an option, obviously you're not obliged to pay this, like you take the decision or not. What now they're thinking is to still allow the remuneration of the capital of the company. Theoretically the amount should be less than what is possible today, but this should be like an automatic deduction that will be calculated.
There's no limitation.
There's
no condition.
Yeah.
It will be automatic.
Okay.
If you have profits or losses, you are going to have the...
To be able to eliminate a portion of the capital invested. Okay. The other thing is very specific. There will be potentially some limitation on deduction of interest in Brazil. The other items for me is very interesting. potentially not for you when you start doing business in Brazil, but Brazil is one of the countries that you cannot do tax consolidations. And when you have like more than 2 or 3 companies in Brazil, it's very important to have tax consolidation, because if you generate loss in one company and you generate profits in the other company within the same economical group, theoretically you want to offset your loss with, because at the end of the day it's the same owner. So now potentially they will allow tax consolidations of Brazilian companies of the same economical group. Okay? Some potential change about tax losses. Goodwill, again, I'm not going to explain too much, but goodwill is also something different in Brazil. Goodwill, this is the amount that when you purchase a Brazilian company that you pay above the book value of the company. So the difference, the company's got a...
Advance the slide.
Oh, sorry.
But further.
You thought I was intelligent, that I had everything in my mind. No, I'm reading everything. Sorry about that. Yeah, when I arrived in Brazil, that was something I'd never seen in other countries. I didn't know that much taxation in a lot of many countries. But like, when a foreign company, when a local company also purchases a Brazilian companies and an amount of goodwill is paid for, again, the fair market value of what is paid and the book value of the companies, the amount of goodwill, we call this goodwill, is tax deductible in Brazil. And this was something that was done in the past exactly to incentivize foreign companies to invest in Brazil, because it was a major tax benefit. I remember like European companies, like when they started to invest in Brazil in the financial market, Santander, all those huge financial groups, they save a lot of money with the deduction of goodwill, because you were able to amortize. When I arrived in Brazil, think about this, you were able to amortize goodwill for 5 years. But over the years, because it was something very, very interesting. And obviously when something is too interesting, what happens? People start to abuse. Because everybody wants the goodwill deductions in Brazil, So what happened over the years is that foreign, local groups also, but foreign groups, national groups that had like many legal entities in Brazil, they started to artificially create goodwill by doing like internal reorganizations of their operations. And there were no specific limitations in the rules that we had at that time. It was more like if this would enter as a tax evasion transaction or not. A couple of years ago, and then you can understand the level of litigations in Brazil is huge. I don't have an amount, but we're talking about billions of reais here. All the foreign financial groups, Santander, all those companies, they were audited. Huge tax assessments. Some of them have win, some of them have not. And then a couple of years ago, they changed the rules to make it more clear, more transparent, a little bit less interesting, but still very interesting. But then they say we need to base the amount of goodwill on an evaluation report, appraisal report, okay? And the goodwill will be amortized based on the projections that are used in the appraisal report. And they prohibited, obviously, all intra-group transactions for the goodwill. Okay, so now there are some. They still want to, because I think the last change that they did, it was still very interesting and it was very transparent, to my view. And now they're thinking of what they call modernizations of the goodwill, but potentially this will fade out over the years. That's probably what's going to happen. Regarding that. Discussions about a minimum tax in Brazil, like a lot of other countries has. CFC rules, it's not very like a preoccupation for you guys, because CFC rules when a Brazilian company is got investment abroad. But me and our firms, I've been doing this all my life. Brazil's probably got a CFC is control foreign corporations rules. Brazil's probably got one of the worst CFC regimes in the world, because the CFC rules internationally are rules to avoid tax avoidance. So to avoid foreign like let's say a Canadian company, to avoid Canadian companies, what they're still doing, but put money in tax haven and those kind of things. So normally those kind of rules are made to limit the avoidance of taxation. Brazil has taken a positions like many years ago, 2001, 2002, decided that all of my Brazilian companies that have investment abroad, I will tax all of their profit abroad at 34%. This is something that I've never seen in my life. I work a lot on this, on international tax planning, by the use of tax treaties. When I was working at PwC, that was a big portion of my work. Because you can understand, I'll give you a very simple example for you guys to understand. A Brazilian company and a Canadian companies. The Canadian companies goes and invest in the Netherlands. Okay, the same Brazilian company, different Brazilian company, but you have a Canadian company going to Holland and a Brazilian company going to Holland doing exactly the same thing. If Holland will tax those profits at 20%, the Canadian companies will pay 20% of tax on the profit. Okay? Because, like I mentioned, the dividends that will be paid from the Netherlands to Canada to repatriate the money will not be taxed in Canada. So, Canada pays 20% tax in the Netherlands. Okay? If a Brazilian company goes to invest in the same thing in the Netherlands will tax them at 20%. What Brazil is going to do? Brazil is going to tax the foreign profit at 34%. And obviously it's going to give a tax credit of 20% for what was paid, but the overall tax cost for a Brazilian company investing in the Netherlands is 34%, and for Canadian companies 20%. So, but they are trying to change those rules, and now they will probably put some rules that will make a little bit more sense to talk about active income, passive income, and so on. But let's see where they're going to go about this. Payrolls are very expensive in Brazil, very expensive. So the reform should be able to reduce a little bit the taxation on payroll. And the last thing, now I'm really going to finish on this because we're running out of time. I put an item here that this is not part of the tax reform. But to give you a little bit of background, transfer pricing, for those that never heard this word, transfer pricing are rules, again, international rules, to define what a corporate group should generate as a profit on its international and so on experience. Okay, it's to make sure that everybody is well remunerated, as if they were working on an arm's length basis with third parties. And most of the countries are all working, and so this is called transfer pricing rules. Most of the countries around the world are using the OECD models, and the US is using a mix of their own rules and the OECD's, similar but a little bit different, but at the same time the principles are the same. Brazil, that always liked to be different and to have different interpretations about tax treaties, also some years ago decided, this was in 1996 I think, and decided Brazil is a very creative country, so they decided, I will create my own transfer pricing rules. And they will be different, and they will be very different. But to make sure that people are not lost, we are going to use method to calculate transfer pricing on method that's got the same name that the OECD model, cost plus, resale price, comparables, safe harbor. So when Brazilian people were talking about transfer pricing with international people, we do a cost plus, we do a resale plus minus, we do comparables, we have safe harbor rules. So everybody were able to have a decent conversation, but when people started to go inside the rules of Brazil, it was completely different. It was completely different, but the benefit of it was easy to calculate. Because people that have already looked at transfer pricing analysis for large economical groups, we're talking about books that are big like this. Because everything is based on comparables, analysis of asset, of risk, and so on to define what should be. In Brazil, nothing of this. When I was working at PwC, and multinational companies say, oh, Philip, I'll send you my transfer pricing analysis that we did. Take a look at this. I was receiving this, I threw everything in the garbage, you know. I just kept the portion about the facts to know exactly what the company is doing, but all the rest I put this in the garbage because it was useless. But it was easy because Brazil was using mainly those two methods, cost plus method and resale price less profit methods. But they decided, they said, we are going to use fixed margin. So I'll give you an example. If I import something today, the cost plus rule is cost plus 20%. And if I export from Brazil, the rule is cost plus 15. Okay? On import, the cost plus 20 is the maximum, and on export, the cost plus 15 is the minimum. And they did the same thing for resale price. Resale price less profit. Some years ago they changed the rule a little bit because there are two rules that create a lot of litigations in Brazil. They put like 3 types of calculation but this is how it was working, and we had safe harbor. So this is how it is right now. Okay. For the past few years, obviously, even both from the side of the OECD and both from the side of Brazil. Both parties, Brazil wants to be a member of the OECD, and I believe that the OECD wants Brazil to be part of the OECD. But all of those differences of transfer pricing, tax treaty interpretations, and so on, always been something that didn't make possible that Brazil managed to enter the OECD as a member. So the past few years with BEPS and all those discussions, finally, and I don't know at this point if it's good or bad, but finally Brazil has decided to align its transfer pricing regulations with the OECD's with some minor difference. And you know, on the, I think it was December 28 or December 29, the government issued a provisional measures that is something that needs to be converted into law. That, to make it like, that align the Brazilian transfer pricing rules with the OECD model. Again, most likely than not, the provisional measure will be subject to modifications. They have like 120 days to convert this into a law. I don't know if they will manage to do this with the discussions. But the way that it is right now, Brazil will be aligned from a transfer pricing perspective with the rest of the world. The way that it was put and the rules will start applying on January the 1st, 2024. So the companies have 1 year to take a look at this, to adjust their business model and so on. But they also, to be honest with you, I don't know who will take that options. But they put the options that if you want, you can elect to apply those new rules for 2023. But this is again, this was not part of the tax reform, but it was on the table as discussions. I don't know if 1 year is sufficient for the tax authorities in Brazil and so on to get ready to apply those rules, because the methodology is completely different, works with comparables and so on. But bottom line, this is excellent news for international group, because by having the fact that Brazil was not aligned with the rest of the world, this has created a lot of double taxation issues around the world. Because Brazil was not including in its tax treaty network a clause that will permit to make counterpart adjustment if there's transfer pricing. So it was a large complaints of a lot of multinational companies. Car companies were always complaining about this, Volkswagen and so on. They had some issues in Brazil about this. So this is a good news. But I think what is important for you is that most likely than not next year we should start applying those rules. And now we need to see, any change but basically now, if you send me your transfer pricing analysis, I will need to take a look at this and see if it makes sense. I won't be able, unfortunately, to throw it in the garbage and so on. So I think from the tax reform, this is what we have to share with you. We're still here if you have some questions, but I thank you again, Peter, to invite us. I had a good time today to do this presentation with you. I hope the same. And we're here to help. I discussed with a lot of people here today. Like if you need any additional information, that will be our pleasure to further discuss. Okay, thank you.
Tax is boring. And that was not boring.
No, just like at the end of
No, that was not boring. A good job, guys. I swear to God. I normally tune it out, fall asleep, I'm gone. I was fascinated. Even at the end when you went in that rabbit hole, man, it was fascinating. I really
When we
appreciate it.
started this subject, I think it's the first day I called Peter. I said,
We're thinking to go to Brazil, and I think it would be good if we could do a presentation about like tax reforms, about what he's expecting, and Peter's notes. But he contributed to. The first thing he said, like, please don't make a boring tax presentation.
That's exactly it. But it wasn't, man. I take my hat off to you guys. It was fascinating to see. So I really think that's interesting. I think it's interesting that everybody stayed too. I do want to thank everybody, and I'd like also to thank Ambassador Vanja Nobrega, the Consul General of Brazil, for opening for us, and Eduardo Fleury and Philippe Jeffrey, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Alessandra Ribeiro, I thought it was very insightful, some of the information that she shared. I took those slides and had, I'm going to have to review them a little later on just to see exactly what's going on. But what I thought was so interesting too is that the broad spectrum of coalition that's needed is actually possible. And I think this is a very interesting time to be looking at Brazil. I want to thank our own team. So we have our marketing manager, Adriana Bedawi, who has done a great job pulling this up together, and the ops manager, Cassia Gomez, who's done such a wonderful job, and Dimas Ferreira is here as a genius, and Khalil Leopoldo is actually behind the scenes. We have volunteers here too, with Marco and Fernanda. Fernanda actually didn't take off, but man, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And folks, I want you to know that we are a volunteer organization, and so if you want to consider joining the BCCC, we'd be happy to have you with us, and we are also happy to connect you with anybody you want to meet and all that stuff, like Vinicius from the Toronto Board of Trade over there, or the team from Boca de Champs, and we have Lavrascol over here, whoops. And so I want you to know that we are happy to make introductions. And so on that note, we are done. So thanks so much for coming.